Hi friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Ritu Khosla, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, MCM DAV College for Women, Chandigarh. The topic that I will be teaching you today is related to articulation. In this topic, we will be comparing the articulation and how the political systems of Asia, Africa and Latin America have been denying the articulation process over the period of time. Now my first question is, what do you mean by articulation? Now if we talk about articulation, it is a way by which you express yourself. It is a way by which you keep forward your desires, your demands. And if you talk about articulation in a political process, it means the way by which the citizens, they keep forward their demands before the government. And now next question is that why articulation is significant, or why are we studying this process of articulation? Now if we talk about articulation, the significance of articulation is that it helps in maintaining the balance between the state and the citizens of the state. Now the citizens, they have certain demands which they keep forward. The government, after being very calculative, they accept those demands or they reject those demands, keeping their viewpoints forward. And this is how the balance is being maintained. Now if we talk about the articulation, it can be done at the individual level also, or as a part of the social group, like being the member of the pressure group or being the part of the interest group. People, they express their viewpoints. Now the further significance is that it helps in stopping the revolution in the state. The reason being, if the rights of the people are curbed, if their voices are curbed, then they might revolt against the state. So this is the role which the articulation it plays at the current time. The objectives of the study are to know the meaning of articulation, to identify the various methods of articulation, to be familiar with the concept of political system, to trace the pattern of articulation in Asia, to know the articulation pattern in Africa and Latin America, and to discuss the response of the political system against the articulation. A civil society is a society in which the people are involved in social, cultural and political interactions which are free of the control of the state. Political system is a value-free power system operating in the whole of the social system with its set boundaries, goals, processes, etc. The interactions that go into acquiring power are usually political. Political word generally refers to power and authority. A system comprises of any set of elements which is part of the whole and their interactions. In every political system, changes take place. That social change is a phenomena, and a static society is a conceptual nullity and an empirical impossibility are commonplace in contemporary social science. In this changing scenario, demands of the people keep on diversifying. Articulation of these demands then become crucial. With an increase in urbanization and industrialization, the society is being overhauled. This leads to changes in the thought processes of the people. As awareness spreads, there is a demand for increased participation of the common citizen. This leads to a strange uneasiness among those who are in power. As against the spread effect of economic development, that of political revolution is one of displacement syndrome. This is, all political revolutions, rebellions and revolts by definition imply the transfer of power from one category to another. Understandably, those who are likely to be deprived of power in the process would cognize these collective actions as undesirable. To complicate matters, the ruling elite would inevitably project itself as the legitimate holder of power, although the sources of legitimacy may vary, divine or secular. And there is a persistent tendency, at least among a section of the population, to support those who hold power. Therefore, any effort to question those who hold power, that is, to protest, is viewed with suspicion and disdain. Despite the disapproval, demands have to be articulated. The people have to show their approval as well as their disdain. People articulate their claims and aspirations because they want political action. Articulation occurs at the boundaries of a political system. Thus, it becomes a very important step in linking the interactions between the people and their political system. The kind of articulation that occurs speak volumes not only about the people's participatory spirit, but also the role played by the political system in accepting that participation or by rejecting it. The latter, if it happens, becomes a dangerous trend and is not according to the spirit of democracy. Interest articulation is important because it marks a boundary between the society and between the political system. Articulation can be in many forms. People can sit on dharnas, strikes, or take out peace marches. Articulation can also be in the form of a dialogue between the citizens and the political system. The people may group themselves into various pressure and interest groups so their voice can reach the authorities and the desired action can be taken. In extreme cases, articulation can take the form of an armed uprising that is detrimental to the health of any political system. In every political system, people desire more freedom, more rights, and more equality. But these are denied in many political systems, especially those which are authoritative or ruled by monarch. Now we will be studying the repression of articulation in Asia. In Asia, China is a communist giant, and there are stories galore about how the political system has responded to articulation in various negative ways. No dissent or criticism is tolerated by the communist regime. The critics have either purged or sent to the prisons that await them. The media is under state control and so is the internet. Though young professional Chinese dislike the lack of access to the internet, they are afraid to speak about their dissatisfaction. Prominent critics of the communist government are detained and then their confessions are aired on television. Pu Ziqiang was arrested on June 2014. He is one of the China's best known lawyers. The charges against him are that of creating disturbance. He advocates freedom of speech and defends dissenters, especially the writers. For this, he was given imprisonment for 3 years. Ilham Tohti, a Uyghur economist, was sentenced to life imprisonment on charges of being a separatist in 2013. His assets were confiscated and bank accounts were frozen. His 7 students were also later tried in 2014. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate Liu Xiaobo is in prison since 2009 and his wife Liu Xia is under extra-legal house arrest. A human rights activist, he calls for an end to the rule of Communist Party. A defender of press freedom, he articulated his views and is suffering in the hands of its own government. In the Tibetan Plateau, any protest by even unarmed people leads to violent repression by the government. Not surprising, for China's stories of repression have always shocked the world. The Tiananmen Square protest in 1989 in China left an unknown number of young dead and an equally number imprisoned. Also known for the June 4th incident, the protest was by the university students and supported by the people who were asking for political as well as economic reforms. The Chinese had then been exposed to foreign ideas and the progressive China had led to the people becoming more westernized. The General Secretary of CCP since 1980, Hu Zhaobang, had encouraged democratic reforms. He was forced to resign in January 1987 and subsequently died mysteriously in mid-April 1987. People labeled him as a martyr, and on the day of his funeral, thousands gathered to ask for further reforms. The crowd at Tiananmen Square grew every day. In Hong Kong in the year 2014, people led by the students came out on the streets to ask for democratic reforms. This was known as the Umbrella Movement or the Umbrella Revolution, where the protesters occupied the streets and important intersections for 79 days, starting from September 26, 2014 to December 15, 2014. The Chinese government did not offer any concessions and the protest camps were dismantled. The people of Hong Kong wanted universal adult franchise, but the Chinese government warned that the candidates have to be approved by the Communist Party. In 2015, when the protesters assembled again, they wanted freedom and were ready to articulate their demands through novel methods, but no one heeded their demand for genuine democracy. In Maldives also, the constitution requires all citizens to identify as Sunni Muslims. This leads to religious oppression against non-Muslims. The ex-president of Maldives, Mohammad Nasheed, who is a human rights activist and a Democrat, had to resign in 2012 after 3 years in power. He succeeded President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who ruled the island country for 30 years from 1987 onwards. People suffered under him, but dissent was not welcomed. Drug abuse, spread of Islamic fundamentalism, gap between the rich and the poor increased during his regime. Opposition was snuffed out. No political parties, red opposition, were allowed to exist in Maldives. The Maldivian Democratic Party organized itself in Britain in 2001. The MDP opposed Gayoom, but many of the supporters were killed brutally and tortured in prison. Citizens in Maldives often report about the limitations on the freedom of speech and the right to assemble. Enforced disappearance, arbitrary arrest and detention, state-sanctioned torture, and widespread intimidation and censorship have significantly increased. In fact, some have become a commonplace. In Myanmar also, the military regime has reportedly suppressed dissent. Efforts are made to exterminate certain ethnic minorities. The NLD leader Aung San Suu Kyi, the voice of the people of Burma, had been placed under the house arrest for many years. The media is totally under the control of military regime. There is no freedom of speech, assembly or association. In September and October 2007, people protested against the wrong policies announced by the military regime. The protesters were jailed by the Buddhist monks who dominated the movement. The government cracked down on the protesters. They were beaten up. Even monks were tied and beaten up. The monks marched in silence to show their solidarity with the people. This protest is known as a Saffron Revolution. Many casualties were reported in this crackdown. The monks then grouped together to form All Burma Monks Alliance and asked an apology for the violence. But the military junta is firmly in saddle. The Turkmenistan government denies freedom of expression and religion to its people. People who were imprisoned in the late 1990s and early 2000s cannot be traced. Media is controlled. During the time of President Nachazov, who remained the president till 2006, the broadcasters began the broadcast on television by taking a pledge that their tongue would shrivel if they criticized the flag, country or the president. Even the internet is heavily regulated. Any opposition to the government is considered as a treason. Now, North Korea, another communist country, doesn't believe in articulation. The Workers' Party of Korea, which is a rubber stamp for 3 generations of the Kim family, Kim Il-sung in 1945, being the first, does not believe in articulation. Thousands of prisoners are in jail with no hope of release, and 3 generations of such prisoners are also condemned because the authoritative believe in guilt by association. When loyal senior members fall out with the regime, they are brutally executed. Anti-aircraft machine guns are used in execution. Uzbekistan has a bad record of detaining civil rights activists. Opposition leaders have been imprisoned without a free trial. Journalists have been kept under house arrest and international journalists have been deported. Women and children are forced to work in cotton fields. Even Kazakhstan government has imprisoned its critics. Opposition groups are banned and media is under state control. Articulation does not garner any kind of respect from the government in these countries. South Arabia, systematic discrimination continues against women, religious minorities, and peaceful political dissidents. Hundreds of people undergo arbitrary detention based on unfair trials. People are sentenced because authorities feel that the person has broken allegiance with the ruler. The case of human rights lawyer Walil Abul Al-Khair is one such case where he has been sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment in 2015. Floggings are common. Freedom of speech and expression is regulated. Women, veiled or clad, have no rights even on their own children. Press is controlled. In Iran, an estimated 35,000 people, mainly women and children, are believed to be held as slaves in Iraq by Islamic State militants who impose a harsh rule marked by gruesome public executions. The people from Zaidi community are prosecuted if they ask for rights. Press censorship, brutal executions, bulldozing, and burning awaits protester. Freedom of speech is alien to the people. These killings have the backing of the government. In other cases, the government is a mute spectator. In Thailand, the military junta is in control. The ruling party, National Council for Peace and Order, which is led by Prime Minister Gen Prayut Cha-o-cha, has persecuted all critiques of the military junta. All political activities have been banned and the dissenters have been tried in military courts in unfair trials. The media is censored. People are detained without trial or any charge. Websites have been blocked. Public gatherings of more than 5 people have been banned. People who protest by putting tape on their mouth or by showing a 3-finger Hunger Games movie salute or by reading George Orwell's 1984 novel are sent to prison. It has also prevented discussions and differences. Elections are being postponed, and when people protest silently, they are tortured. Response of political systems in Africa. In Egypt, for 60 years, none could dare to speak against the dictators that ruled Egypt, one succeeding the other. It all started with the president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who sent the secret police at night to whisk away opponents. The police was named as night visitors because Nasser's opponents were never seen again. He was the ruler immediately after the end of the British occupation. Gamal was succeeded by Anwar Sadat in 1950. Sadat gets credit for opening the Egypt's economy, but remained totally in control of political scenario in Egypt. To combat the leftist Sadat stifled opposition in the universities of the University of Law of 1979. Hosni Mubarak came to power after the assassination of Anwar Sadat in 1981. Presently, he is being tried. His rule lasted till January 2011, till the Arab Spring movement. Hundreds of members of Muslim Brotherhood, the opposition, have been persecuted on his orders. The police was brutal under him and elections were gagged. As he came to power, he imposed the emergency law so that his government could arrest and detain anybody without charge. Public gatherings were limited, the rich were getting richer and the poor poorer. Hosni had to leave power when the pent-up frustration of the people brought them to the streets, led by the Muslim Brotherhood. But the rosy picture disappeared in 2013 when democracy was again shown the door. Robert Mugabe and his party African National Union Patriotic Front in Zimbabwe have intimidated dissenters and political opponents. Rule of law does not prevail. Political violence is the hallmark of the country. There is no freedom of speech or assembly. Police used violence to prevent a meeting on March 11, 2007, organized by many like-minded civil society groups at Zimbabwe grounds in Highfields, Hazare. Many opposition leaders and activists were arrested. The meeting's slogan was Save Zimbabwe Campaign. Mugabe said that he believed that his critics need to be bashed up. A systematic repression of all those voices that speak against Mugabe started and opposition was gradually crushed. In Equatorial Guinea, government represses journalists, members of opposition and civil society groups and engages itself in torture, unfair tricks and arbitrary detention. There is no freedom for the press. The pro-democracy Arab Spring movements of 2011 were not raised in the country. Even foreign journalists were told to delete photographs. General Sani Abacha in Nigeria is known among all other things to brutally crush a strike by the oil workers in 1994. Further, in Syria also, the security forces were given sweeping powers to detain and arrest anybody from 1963 to April 2011. The government arrests its critics and advocates of democracy in Sudan also. President al-Bashir has committed heinous crimes. Example in Darfur, where non-Arabs have been killed in large number, yet he is contesting elections. The situation is equally grim in Somalia, Rwanda, Ethiopia and Cameroon among others. Because of colonialism and white repression, which can be considered the two twin problems of the African countries, these countries are more often subjected to military coup. The dominance of tribes leads to internal fighting. This leads to the rise of military dictators, ably supported by the security forces who get overwhelming powers. The dictator and small group of elite retain gain power by suppressing any opinion that differs from its own. The ousting of one dictator does not mean that democracy would be safe in that country. One dictator is replaced by the another, who continues with the same repression tactics as his predecessor. Talk about the response of the political system to articulation in Latin America. Many Latin American countries are also reeling under the draconian laws passed by the dictators. Fidel Castro of Cuba used firing squads liberally even before he came to power to instill discipline and fear amongst his followers. Since his coming to power on January 1st, 1959, thousands have been killed by the firing squads. No trial, no hearing was given to the victims. Critics of Fidel Castro are sent to hard labor camps where they are without proper clothes and do not get adequate food. Fidel Castro has recently handed over the power to his brother Raul Castro, who is continuing the legacy of his brother. Records are maintained of each individual. Many movements opposing the Castro brothers are working, but they are violently suppressed. In Nigeria, Anastasio Somoza Garcia ruled from 1936 to 56. He was assassinated, but his sons carried on his legacy. Supported by the United States of America, he violated human rights and brutally suppressed any opposition. Presently, the ruling Sandinista National Liberation Front is executing its opponents. House of suspects are raised on the grounds. Haiti's dictator-ruler Jean-Claude Duvalier followed in his father's footsteps, who died in 1971 and brutally repressed those not in his inner circle. President for life, Jean-Claude ruled with an iron fist and slaughtered people. Jean had to finally escape to Paris but returned in 2011. President Aristide came to power but has been overthrown by the martial government that supports the Duvalier's legacy. Repression is all-time high in Haiti. Okay friends, let us sum up now what we have done till now. Now we have taken up the case studies of the political system of Asia, Africa and Latin America, and we had discussed the various cases by which we came to know that how the viewpoints of the people are being curbed in these countries. Now if we talk about articulation, that is the key ingredient of a democratic form of government. And if we talk about a democratic form of government, the main element of democracy is the freedom of speech and expression. That is how the people are able to express themselves against the government or in favor of the government. And if this articulation process of the people is being curbed, it means that we are not having a democratic form of government, rather that is an authoritarian form of government, where the rights of people are curbed, where the liberties of people are curbed, and people, they are subjected to the rules and regulations which are made by the state, else they can be punished for that. So if such a system continues over the period of time, that will create an uprising, that can create a revolution, and ultimately that can lead to the overthrow of the government, or the government machinery will come to a standstill. That is why we always refer that articulation is the lifeline of people in the democracy, and that needs to be respected. Thank you.